Hello everyone, Ace here, and today I've got something rather special for you all. A story about a video game journalist called John Phipps. And what a lengthy story it may well be. However, to tell it, I feel it's best to talk about the most recent article that he has written, which is on IGN, which is simply titled Call of Duty Modern Warfare and the Cruel Realities of White Phosphorus. In this article, John Phipps complains about the depiction of the particular substance within Call of Duty, and how it isn't realistic nor graphic enough in his eyes. In addition, the closing paragraph for this particular article highlights his true purpose here, saying, quote, "I don't believe something as legally and morally questionable as white phosphorus is appropriate in the very specific way Infinity Ward is applying it here." And when considering the context that he is talking about multiplayer specifically, he is effectively arguing that the content should be removed from the game. Now, some of you may be wondering why he isn't talking about the use of nuclear weapons as a killstreak reward within the multiplayer of Call of Duty if he's going to complain about Willie Pete. And others may ask why he isn't going after other multiplayer games that have used that same substance in very similar manners. For one example, this particular substance is used in Rising Storm 2 Vietnam, in its multiplayer, and yet Mr. Phipps has never complained about it. Another example of a multiplayer-focused FPS that includes Willie Pete happens to be Verdun, gameplay footage of which you can see in the background now. And full disclosure, one of the developers behind Verdun also worked on Battlefield 1918, so normally I wouldn't talk about that game or even Tannenberg due to potential conflicts of interest. However, I do believe it is at least appropriate to discuss it here because of how fitting it is to the conversation, because Verdun also, like I've said, includes this particular substance, and yet we have never seen John Phipps complain about it. Despite the fact that if he truly cared as he would have you believe, then he would definitely be talking about it. But the truth is he doesn't actually care, and I can demonstrate that quite substantially. For you see, this isn't the first time that John Phipps has complained about Call of Duty. Back in June, he decided to write a very lengthy thread on Twitter as well as do an entire 30+ minute video on why he was unhappy about the game back then. But contrary to what he may want you to believe, it wasn't because the game wasn't realistic enough. It was in fact because it was trying to be too realistic in his eyes, by including touchy subjects such as collateral damage, going so far as to flat out say in his video that he doesn't believe that such content should flat out be in a video game period, or any art form period. In fact, he even provides an example by explaining how a particular movie had a director which refused to show a certain scene from the book that it is based on, because it was in his eyes unfilmable. And for those of you who are curious, I will be playing that clip now.
In Call of Duty, that is one thing that I don't approve of. I want it out. I want to take it out. Call it fucking censorship if you want, but here's the thing. There are some things that you just shouldn't put in games. There are just some things you shouldn't film, and a good example is a movie called The Road, based on the book The Road by Cormac McCarthy. When I read the book, in the book there is a scene near the end of the book where two men and a woman are roasting a baby on a spit. And it's an incredibly brutal scene in a post-apocalyptic world. And when they filmed the movie, the director said, "You know what? I can't film that. I can't film that because it's unfilmable. That's not something that I'm interested in. It's not something that I want to depict because it's not in good taste." I don't see how this is any different.
And of course, as I've already mentioned, Mr. Phipps has also complained about the fact that Infinity Ward is attempting to market this game as being more realistic than previous Call of Duty games. However, his true hypocrisy on this opinion showed when he decided to defend other game journalists who were also talking about the apparent realism in the new Call of Duty game. So given the proper context, it's quite obvious that not only does John Phipps not actually care about whether or not Willie Pete is actually in the game, but instead wishes to complain about the new Call of Duty game for no other reason than to show his crocodile tears and fake outrage, even if it means taking up completely contrary positions on where the new Call of Duty game should go. Now, I'm not the first person to call out this particular journalist on their calls for censorship over the new Call of Duty game. For example, Jeremy from the Quartering has already done a rather splendid set of videos on the subject matter, even if he is just talking about the latest article. However, in response, John Phipps has been rather upset for a few reasons. For a start, he claims that he wasn't actually calling for censorship, even though I've provided video evidence of how he has indeed called for censorship. Another thing, however, that has apparently upset him so is the fact that Jeremy from the Quartering has referred to him as a soldier rather than a former Marine, as he wishes to be referred to. Now granted, this is definitely a thing within the military, and Mr. Phipps did indeed serve in the US Marine Corps. However, with the most cursory glance of evidence, it becomes clear that this is a classic case of a rule for thee and not for me. For you see, while John Phipps has called out Jeremy from the quartering for doing this, he has not called out other journalists who have made this exact same mistake, and perhaps most telling of all, he has referred to himself in one of his own articles as a quote, parent and soldier. So given what we know about this man, it becomes quite clear that this is yet another example of his faux outrage, and in addition, a desperate attempt at a gotcha from this particular individual. And another means by which Mr. John Phipps has tried to defend himself is by claiming that he isn't a real journalist, which is a rather bizarre defense considering he openly advertises himself as working on publications such as GameDaily.biz, Polygon, and even IGN. But either way, it's a defense that becomes completely irrelevant when you realize that his GameDaily.biz article lists him as a freelance journalist, which only demonstrates that he has once again lied to us all. Now you may think that this is getting rather silly, but unfortunately fasten your seatbelts because we are just getting started. Because while Mr. John Phipps calls for the censorship of the new Call of Duty game, he actively on the other hand promotes violence against certain individuals that he disagrees with politically speaking. And not just throwing milkshakes at people, but also punching them in the face as well, in real life. And when called out on this stance by none other than Miss Sophia Narwitz herself, Mr. John Phipps responded by trying to compare the acts of violence that he promotes to an actual war, suggesting that he, a combat veteran, cannot tell the difference between a video game and real-life combat. Because despite his constant complaints, at the end of the day, Call of Duty is still a video game and not real life. And as ridiculous as this whole nonsense is getting, there is still more to talk about. And this time, it's regarding Mr. John Phipps' military record. And a big thanks needs to be given to both Sparta and Ian Miles Chung for exposing the next bit. Because as it turns out, his DD-214 has leaked on the internet, and it does call into question some of the claims that he has in the past made. Now, to be completely fair to Mr. Phipps, some of these discrepancies can absolutely be explained. For example, it is entirely possible that he was wounded in action, but simply denied the Purple Heart. However, some claims simply cannot be explained away in this manner. For example, Mr. Phipps claimed that he had made the rank of sergeant. However, his DD-214 very specifically lists him as a corporal. And when this was exposed, Mr. Phipps tried to explain this discrepancy by claiming that he had received his promotion while in IRR, and after he had already received his DD-214. And in addition, provided a link that he hoped would further back his claim up. The problem is that he has been claiming to be a sergeant since at least 2015, whereas the article that he provided to support his claim was written long after that date. In other words, he attempted to falsify evidence to further support himself. But here's the problem with him claiming a rank that his records show that he did not achieve, and that is the fact that he is using this status as a veteran for monetary gain. As this man has made a point of going into the details of his military experience in literally every single article he's written for IGN, Polygon, and GameDaily.biz. In other words, despite the fact that he would like you to believe in his video, for example, that it's rather difficult for him to talk about the subject matter, he literally brings it up at every opportunity that he can. And the reasons for this are of course quite obvious. Because he is a journalist, one of his main goals is to get as much attention as possible, because that's how he makes his money. And to be completely honest, this wouldn't be an issue if he were at least being honest and accurate with his service record. But as I've already shown, he's claiming a rank that the records state he did not achieve. And when called out for this, he even went so far as to provide what can be best described as misleading evidence to support his claim. The issue here is that attempting to claim a rank that you simply did not achieve for monetary gain is flat out illegal. It is actually a federal offense. And since he does appear to be using his Twitter profile to promote his work and receive even more monetary gain, while at the same time making these false claims on it to further promote himself, I would say that he is in violation of the law here. But to be fair, I wouldn't exactly call myself a legal expert, so ultimately I would defer to their take on this issue if anyone. But nevertheless, there's still a lot of shady things that this particular individual has done, and he has also been caught lying repeatedly, as I've already demonstrated, such as lying about the fact that he called for censorship within Call of Duty, or lying about the fact that he's a journalist. But believe it or not, his constant lies are not the thing that bugs me the most about this man. For you see, in the video that I've already mentioned, he actually even went so far as to explain the specific detailed fates of some of his fallen comrades in his rant against Call of Duty for daring to market itself as being more realistic than previous iterations. Now, I wouldn't personally have an issue with this except for the fact that he doesn't even play this particular genre of game in the first place, which is something that he also admits later on in that video. In other words, he has no personal investment adjustment with what the developers do or do not do with Call of Duty. And that's when it hit me. This man legitimately does not care what happened to his fallen comrades, to the extent that he would so willingly stand upon them as a soapbox from which to spout his opinions on a video game that he doesn't even care about, because it comes from a genre that he doesn't even play. It's actually quite disgusting how cheap the memory of his comrades are to this man. If you're going to use their memory in this manner, at least do it for a cause that's actually worth something by your own estimate. And when I say something, I mean something more than a simple paycheck. So I hope you can understand why I don't exactly have the brightest opinion of this particular individual. And in truth, I've probably let this video go on for a bit longer than I should have. But if you folks wish to discuss it here yourself, feel free to do so. I will of course be providing links to all of this in the description below, and I'll even make a special point of uploading that half-hour-long video that I've already mentioned repeatedly, just in case he decides to try to delete it from his Twitter account. In any case, this has been Ace. Hope to see you guys again soon. Take care. Ace out.